Good evening, and welcome. Tonight, I'd like to invite you to travel somewhere quiet, somewhere far away from busy streets, glowing phone screens, and the endless rush of modern life. Together, we'll wander back nearly 1,000 years to a peaceful riverside village where mornings begin with birdsong, evenings end beneath gentle lantern light, and the warm scent of fresh bread drifts softly through the cool air. So, settle into your favorite sleeping position. Allow your shoulders to relax. Let your breathing become slow and steady. There is nowhere you need to be, nothing you need to solve. For the next little while, all you have to do is listen. And as the story unfolds, perhaps you'll discover that some places never truly disappear. They simply wait, patiently, for someone willing to remember them. Long before clocks measured the passing hours, before cities stretched across the horizon, before trains, engines, and electric lights, there stood a tiny village beside a quiet river. The villagers simply called it Willow Crossing. It wasn't famous. Travelers rarely marked it on their maps. Kings never visited. Great battles were never fought nearby. It was the kind of place the world often forgot. And yet, to the people who lived there, it was the center of everything. Each morning the river reflected the first pale colors of dawn. Mist floated gently across the water like a soft blanket. Willow trees leaned over the banks, their long green branches brushing the surface as though whispering ancient stories only the river could understand. Small wooden cottages rested beneath tall oak trees. Stone paths curved between flower gardens. Smoke curled lazily from chimneys. And somewhere, almost hidden beneath climbing ivy and blooming roses, a warm golden lantern glowed beside an old wooden door. That was the Lantern Bakery. No one remembered exactly when it had first been built. Even the village elders would smile and shrug whenever children asked. It has simply always been here. Its walls were made of weathered stone. Its roof wore thick patches of moss that changed color with every season. Tiny windows caught the morning sunlight like pieces of polished amber. And beside the front entrance hung a brass lantern. Every evening, without fail, someone lit its gentle flame. Every morning, it still glowed softly, as though it had been quietly watching over the village throughout the entire night. No one considered it magical. It simply felt comforting, reliable, like an old friend waiting patiently by the door. Inside the bakery, before the sun had fully risen, someone was already awake. His name was Elias. He wasn't young, nor especially old. His hair had begun to turn silver around the temples. His hands were strong from years of kneading dough. His smile arrived slowly, but it always reached his eyes. Elias lived in a small room above the bakery. Every morning, long before anyone else opened their shutters, he would wake naturally, not because of an alarm, not because anyone expected him to, but because the quiet morning had become part of his heart. He would open the window, feel the cool air, listen to the gentle river, and breathe deeply, as though greeting an old friend. Only then would he descend the narrow wooden stairs. Each step creaked softly beneath his feet. The bakery still rested in darkness, but not for long. Elias struck a small piece of flint. A tiny spark appeared, then another. Soon, a gentle fire began dancing inside the stone oven. The first warmth of the day slowly filled the room. Outside, the village still slept. Inside, the day had quietly begun. The first loaf of bread was never rushed. Elias believed that every morning deserved a quiet beginning. He poured cool spring water into a wide wooden bowl. The water had been drawn from the village well the evening before, where it had rested through the night beneath the stars. Then came the flour. Soft, pale, almost like fresh snow. He added a pinch of sea salt, carefully measured between his fingers. Finally, he crumbled a small piece of sourdough starter into the mixture. It was older than anyone in the village, older than Elias himself. His father had cared for it before him, and before that, his grandfather. Every baker had added a little flour and water each day, keeping the starter alive through countless seasons. It carried, in a quiet way, the memory of every loaf the bakery had ever baked. Elias smiled gently as he stirred the mixture with a worn wooden spoon. There was no hurry. The dough would rise in its own time, just as flowers opened only when they were ready, and rivers reached the sea without ever rushing. Outside, the sky slowly changed from deep blue to soft shades of lavender. A single robin landed on the bakery's windowsill. It tilted its tiny head, as if checking whether breakfast was nearly ready. Elias chuckled quietly. Not yet, my little friend, he whispered. The bird seemed perfectly content to wait. As the fire warmed the oven, the room filled with comforting sounds. The gentle crackle of burning oak wood, the soft scrape of the wooden spoon against the bowl, the rhythmic pressing and folding of dough beneath experienced hands. It was music without instruments, a melody the bakery had played every morning for generations. Soon, the dough became smooth and elastic. Elias placed a clean linen cloth over the bowl and carried it to a warm corner near the oven. There, he said softly. Now you may rest. The bakery grew still again. There was nothing more to do except wait. And waiting, Elias believed, was one of life's greatest teachers. So he poured himself a small cup of warm herbal tea. He opened the front door. The brass lantern still glowed faintly in the fading darkness. Its golden light shimmered across the dew-covered stones outside. Beyond the bakery, the river drifted quietly between green reeds and willow trees. Mist floated low over the water. Everything seemed wrapped in peaceful silence. No carts rattled down the road. No voices echoed through the village. Even the breeze moved carefully, as though it didn't wish to wake anyone too soon. Elias sat on the old wooden bench beside the bakery door. He held the warm cup between his hands. Steam curled gently into the cool morning air. This quiet moment, before the village awoke, had always been his favorite part of the day. Not because anything exciting happened, but because nothing needed to happen. Sometimes, peace is simply the absence of hurry. Sometimes, happiness is found in waiting for bread to rise, while the world slowly wakes around you. Far away, the church bell rang once. A calm, deep note rolled across the valley. One by one, tiny signs of life began to appear. A window opened. A rooster crowed in the distance. A cat stretched lazily beside a fence. And somewhere across the river, someone began whistling a simple tune. The village of Willow Crossing was waking, just as it always had. And soon, the warm fragrance of fresh bread would drift through every quiet street, inviting neighbors to begin another gentle day together. Now you may rest. The bakery grew still again. There was nothing more to do except wait. And waiting, Elias believed, was one of life's greatest teachers. So he poured himself a small cup of warm herbal tea. He opened the front door. The brass lantern still glowed faintly in the fading darkness. Its golden light shimmered across the dew-covered stones outside. Beyond the bakery, the river drifted quietly between green reeds and willow trees. Mist floated low over the water. Everything seemed wrapped in peaceful silence. No carts rattled down the road. No voices echoed through the village. Even the breeze moved carefully, as though it didn't wish to wake anyone too soon. Elias sat on the old wooden bench beside the bakery door. He held the warm cup between his hands. Steam curled gently into the cool morning air. This quiet moment, before the village awoke, had always been his favorite part of the day. Not because anything exciting happened, but because nothing needed to happen. Sometimes, peace is simply the absence of hurry. Sometimes, happiness is found in waiting for bread to rise, while the world slowly wakes around you. Far away, the church bell rang once. A calm, deep note rolled across the valley. One by one, tiny signs of life began to appear. A window opened. A rooster crowed in the distance. A cat stretched lazily beside a fence. And somewhere across the river, someone began whistling a simple tune. The village of Willow Crossing was waking, just as it always had. And soon, the warm fragrance of fresh bread would drift through every quiet street, inviting neighbors to begin another gentle day together. The village begins to stir. The sun had not yet climbed above the distant hills, but the darkness had already begun to soften. A pale ribbon of golden light stretched across the eastern sky, touching the tops of the willow trees that lined the quiet river. Tiny drops of dew sparkled on every blade of grass. For a brief moment, it seemed as though the entire village had been sprinkled with countless little stars. Elias finished the last sip of his warm tea. The cup was still warm in his hands, even as the cool morning breeze drifted gently through the narrow street. He stood slowly, breathing in the fresh air one more time before returning inside. The bakery welcomed him with familiar warmth. The stone oven glowed softly. The fire crackled with quiet confidence. And in the corner, the dough had nearly doubled in size. Elias smiled. It seems you've had a good rest. He carefully removed the linen cloth. The dough looked smooth, light, and full of tiny bubbles, each one a small promise of the bread to come. With practiced hands, he gently folded it onto the wooden table. There was no force, no hurried movements, only patience. He divided the dough into several equal pieces. Each loaf would have its own place in the oven. Each loaf would find its own family before the day was over. Some would be carried home by farmers after tending their fields. Some would travel with fishermen along the river. Others would be shared around dinner tables where children laughed, grandparents told stories, and candles flickered gently against old wooden walls. Perhaps that was the true purpose of bread, not merely to fill empty stomachs, but to quietly gather people together. Outside, footsteps finally echoed along the stone road. The village was awake. The first visitor, as always, arrived without knocking. It was Mrs. Eleanor. She was the oldest woman in Willow Crossing. No one knew exactly how old she was. Some believed she had lived through 70 winters. Others insisted it had been 80. She herself simply smiled whenever anyone asked. "I've had enough birthdays to stop counting," she would say with a cheerful laugh. She carried a small woven basket over one arm and wore a blue woolen shawl that seemed almost as old as the bakery itself. The little brass bell above the bakery door chimed softly as she stepped inside. "Good morning, Elias." "Good morning, Mrs. Eleanor." "The smell reached my garden before the sunrise," she said, smiling. "I suppose the bread wished to greet you early today." She laughed quietly. "I believe it did." While the loaves rested for their final rise, Elias poured her a cup of warm chamomile tea. She accepted it with grateful hands. Neither of them spoke for several moments. There was no need. Some friendships had grown so comfortable that silence itself became part of the conversation. Mrs. Eleanor gazed through the bakery window. Outside, children were beginning to cross the little wooden bridge on their way to fetch water. A farmer guided two gentle horses toward the fields. Smoke rose lazily from cottage chimneys. Somewhere nearby, a dog barked once before settling down again. The whole village seemed to awaken like a flower opening beneath the morning sun. Mrs. Eleanor smiled softly. "I've watched this village wake for many years," she said. "And somehow, it never grows old." Elias nodded. "No, it never does." At that very moment, the first loaf slid gently into the glowing oven. The warm scent of fresh bread slowly began to fill every corner of the bakery. Soon, it would drift through every quiet street in Willow Crossing, carried gently by the morning breeze, inviting everyone to begin another peaceful day. The first bread of the morning. The warm air inside the bakery grew richer with every passing minute. The stone oven hummed quietly, its gentle heat wrapping around the room like a comforting blanket. Elias stood nearby, watching through the small iron window in the oven door. He never hurried this part. Bread had its own rhythm, its own quiet language. It asked only for patience. Outside, the village had fully awakened. The morning mist slowly lifted from the river, revealing smooth water that reflected the brightening sky like polished glass. A pair of ducks glided silently across the surface. Their tiny ripples spread gently outward before disappearing into stillness. The bell above the bakery door chimed once again. This time, it was young Thomas. He couldn't have been more than 10 years old. Every morning before helping his father in the apple orchard, he stopped by the bakery. Not because he was hungry, although he usually was, but because he loved the smell. He believed the bakery smelled happier than anywhere else in the village. "Good morning, Mr. Elias." "Good morning, Thomas. Is today the honey bread day?" Elias smiled. "It certainly is." Thomas's eyes sparkled. "My mother says your honey bread tastes like sunshine." Elias chuckled softly. "Your mother is very kind." The boy wandered toward the window, standing on his toes to peek inside the glowing oven. "Do you ever get tired of making bread?" For a moment, Elias didn't answer. Instead, he listened to the quiet crackle of the fire. Then he smiled. "I don't think I'm making the same bread every day." Thomas looked puzzled. "But it looks the same." "Perhaps," Elias replied gently. "But today's bread is for today's people." He looked toward the village outside. Someone may celebrate a birthday. Someone may welcome a new baby. Someone may return home after a long journey. And someone may simply need a warm loaf to remind them that they're not alone. Thomas thought about that for a long moment. Then he nodded very seriously. "I never thought bread could do all that." Elias laughed quietly. "Most people don't." Just then, a wonderful sound filled the room. The crust of the first loaf gave a soft crack. It was one of Elias's favorite sounds in the world. The bread had finished baking, golden brown. Its crust shone gently in the warm light of the bakery. Tiny wisps of steam escaped from its surface, carrying the comforting aroma of wheat, butter, and honey. The fragrance drifted through the open doorway, across the stone path, past the little flower gardens, toward the quiet cottages that lined the village road. Windows began opening. People smiled without quite knowing why. Somewhere, a grandmother paused while hanging freshly washed clothes. A fisherman lifted his head from tying his nets. A little girl skipped a little faster toward the village square. The smell of fresh bread had become Willow Crossing's morning greeting. It arrived before conversations, before work, before the busy hours of the day. It reminded everyone that another peaceful morning had begun. Inside the bakery, Elias placed the warm loaf onto a wooden cooling rack. He never cut the first loaf. Not immediately. Bread needed a few quiet moments to rest, just as people sometimes did. Thomas watched carefully. So, even bread needs time to catch its breath? Elias smiled. In a way, yes. The little boy grinned. I think I like bread even more now. Outside, the gentle breeze carried the bakery's warm scent farther down the riverside path. And somewhere beyond the willow trees, someone new was slowly making their way toward the village. Someone who had been walking for many days. Someone searching not only for food, but perhaps, without even realizing it, for a place that felt like home. The traveler on the riverside path. By the time the first loaves had finished cooling, the little bakery had become the warmest place in Willow Crossing. The morning sun now rested above the eastern hills, pouring gentle light across the river. The willow branches swayed lazily in the breeze. Somewhere nearby, bees floated from one wildflower to the next, moving so slowly that they seemed to be enjoying the morning just as much as everyone else. Inside the bakery, Elias arranged each loaf carefully on wide wooden shelves. Round country bread, honey bread with golden crusts, small rolls sprinkled with oats, and long rustic loaves that would stay fresh for several days. He placed each one exactly where it belonged, not because anyone would notice, but because order brought him a quiet kind of happiness. The little brass bell above the door chimed again. This time, two fishermen stepped inside, their boots still damp from the riverbank. Morning, Elias. Good morning. The river is calm today, one of them said. It almost looks asleep. Elias wrapped two warm loaves in soft linen cloth. The calmest rivers often carry the deepest reflections. The fishermen smiled, though neither of them said anything. They had learned long ago that Elias rarely spoke many words. But when he did, they stayed with you. After thanking him, they stepped back into the sunshine, carrying the fresh bread toward their small wooden boat. For a little while, the bakery became quiet once more. Only the crackling fire and the cheerful singing of birds filled the room. Then, Elias noticed someone standing outside. Not a villager, not someone he recognized. The stranger remained near the old willow tree across the road. He carried a weathered leather satchel over one shoulder. His traveling cloak was faded from many seasons beneath the sun. Dust covered his boots, and although he stood perfectly still, his eyes wandered slowly across the peaceful village, taking in every cottage, every flower garden, every curl of smoke rising from the chimneys. He looked tired, not only from walking, but from carrying many silent miles within his heart. Elias opened the bakery door. Good morning. The traveler looked up and smiled politely. Good morning. You've come a long way. I believe I have. Elias nodded toward the bakery. Would you care for some fresh bread? The traveler hesitated. I don't have much to offer in return. Elias simply smiled. Then today, you may offer nothing at all. For a moment, the traveler didn't move. Perhaps he wasn't used to kindness without conditions. Slowly, he stepped inside. Warm air wrapped around him immediately. The comforting aroma of fresh bread, melted butter, honey, and burning oak wood filled every breath. His shoulders relaxed without him even noticing. Elias poured a cup of warm herbal tea. Then he placed a freshly baked honey loaf on a small wooden board. Steam still rose gently from its golden crust. The traveler closed his eyes for a moment. I don't remember the last time bread smelled like this. Elias took a seat across the table. Then today is a good day to remember. Outside, the river continued its quiet journey toward places neither of them could see. Inside the bakery, The traveler broke off a small piece of warm bread. Its crust crackled softly. The inside was light, warm, and tender. He took one slow bite. For several long moments, he said nothing. Then, almost in a whisper, he smiled. "It tastes like someone was expecting me." Elias looked toward the glowing lantern hanging beside the bakery door. Perhaps that was exactly what the Lantern Bakery had always been. Not simply a place where bread was baked, but a place where every weary traveler could feel, if only for a little while, that they had finally arrived somewhere they belonged. The story hidden in the satchel. The bakery settled into a peaceful silence once again. Outside, the village had become gently busy. Children laughed somewhere beyond the little wooden bridge. A wagon rolled slowly along the stone road, its wooden wheels turning with a familiar, comforting rhythm. The river continued its quiet journey, sparkling beneath the growing morning sun. Inside, the traveler sat near the window, warming his hands around a simple clay cup of herbal tea. For several minutes, neither he nor Elias spoke. The silence felt natural, comfortable, like the quiet between old friends who understood that not every moment needed to be filled with words. The traveler finished another small piece of honey bread. He closed his eyes for just a moment, letting the warmth settle within him. Then he looked down at the weathered leather satchel resting beside his chair. Its edges were worn smooth from years of travel. The straps had been repaired many times with careful stitching. Elias noticed the satchel, but asked nothing. He had learned long ago that every traveler carried two kinds of luggage. One could be seen. The other lived quietly inside the heart. After another peaceful moment, the traveler smiled. "I've crossed forests where the trees seemed older than memory. I've walked over mountains where the wind never stopped singing. I've slept beneath skies so clear that every star seemed close enough to touch." His voice was calm, almost dreamy. But somehow, he glanced around the bakery. "This little room feels warmer than all of those places." Elias smiled gently as he brushed a little flour from the wooden table. "Sometimes, warmth doesn't come from the fire. It comes from feeling welcome." The traveler nodded slowly. "I think you're right." Outside the open window, a breeze carried the scent of wildflowers through the room. The curtains swayed softly. Somewhere nearby, a wind chime made of tiny seashells sang a delicate melody. The traveler reached into his satchel. From inside, he carefully removed a small notebook. Its leather cover had faded with time. The corners were rounded from years of careful handling. He placed it gently on the table. "I've kept this journal for many years. Every village, every river, every mountain. I write about the places that make the world feel a little kinder." Elias looked at the little book with quiet curiosity. "And has Willow Crossing earned a place in its pages?" The traveler smiled. "I think it already has." He opened the journal to a blank page. Dipping a feather quill into a tiny bottle of ink, he paused for a moment, listening to the crackling fire. Then, in slow, careful handwriting, he began to write. "There is a village beside a quiet river where bread is baked before the sunrise. The people greet strangers as neighbors, and a lantern beside an old wooden door reminds every traveler that somewhere in the world, kindness still waits with the morning light." When he finished, he closed the journal with a gentle smile. "I hope," he said softly, "that someone will read these words many years from now and find their way here." Elias looked toward the glowing lantern beside the door. Its golden light still shimmered softly, even in the brightness of the morning. Perhaps that was the lantern's true purpose. Not merely to light the doorway, but to quietly guide those who had been searching for a place where they could rest. Outside, the church bell rang once again. The village carried on with its gentle rhythm. And inside the bakery, another peaceful day had only just begun. As the afternoon slowly drifted toward evening, the golden light over Willow Crossing became softer. Long shadows stretched across the cobblestone paths. The river, which had sparkled brightly beneath the midday sun, now reflected gentle shades of amber, rose, and pale lavender. It was the kind of evening that seemed to ask everyone to slow down. The bakery had grown quieter. Most of the day's bread had found new homes. Only a few warm loaves remained on the wooden shelves, filling the room with their comforting aroma. Elias swept a light dusting of flour from the floor with an old straw broom. He enjoyed this simple task. Each slow stroke of the broom marked the peaceful end of another successful day. Outside, the traveler stood beside the river. He watched the water flow gently around smooth stones that had rested there for countless years. There was no hurry in the river, no desire to reach tomorrow. It simply continued, one quiet moment after another. He smiled. Perhaps people had once lived that way too. When he returned to the bakery, Elias had already placed a small iron kettle over the fire. Soon, the familiar scent of chamomile and mint filled the room. Without saying a word, Elias poured 2 cups. One for himself, one for his guest. The traveler accepted the warm cup with grateful hands. For a while, they simply listened. The fire crackled softly. The wooden walls settled with tiny creaks. Outside, birds sang their final songs before nightfall. Then, from somewhere across the village, came the gentle laughter of children playing their last game before being called home for supper. "It sounds peaceful here every evening," the traveler said quietly. Elias nodded. "It has sounded this way for longer than I can remember." The traveler looked toward the glowing lantern hanging beside the bakery door. "I noticed something. The lantern. It hasn't been lit yet." Elias smiled. "It will be. Just before the sun disappears. Not too early. Not too late. As it has been every evening for generations." The traveler tilted his head. "Who lights it?" For a moment, Elias looked out the window toward the quiet village. Then he answered with a gentle smile. "Whoever reaches it first." The traveler looked surprised. "There isn't one person responsible." Elias shook his head. "No. Some evenings, it's me. Sometimes it's Mrs. Eleanor. Sometimes little Thomas insists on helping. Even travelers have lit it before continuing their journeys. The lantern belongs to everyone." The traveler smiled warmly. "I think I understand. It's not the flame that matters. It's the kindness of the hands that light it." Elias nodded. "I couldn't have said it better myself." Outside, the sun slowly slipped behind the western hills. The sky turned deep orange, then rose, then soft violet. One by one, tiny stars appeared above Willow Crossing. At that very moment, the bakery door opened. It was little Thomas. Without saying a word, he carried a small wooden stool to the brass lantern. Carefully, he climbed onto it. Elias handed him a small candle. The boy reached up. A tiny flame touched the lantern's wick. For just a heartbeat, the light flickered. Then it glowed steadily. Warm, golden, welcoming. Its gentle light spilled across the stone path, the flower garden, and the quiet village street. The traveler watched in silence. He realized that the lantern was never meant to brighten the entire village. It didn't need to. It simply reminded anyone passing by that somewhere nearby, there was warmth, there was fresh bread, and there would always be someone happy to welcome them inside. As darkness settled peacefully over Willow Crossing, the little lantern continued to glow, patiently, faithfully, just as it always had. And somehow, under its quiet light, the whole village felt a little closer to home. The lantern after sunset. Night settled gently over Willow Crossing. The last colors of sunset faded beyond the western hills, leaving behind a sky painted in deep shades of blue. One by one, stars appeared above the quiet river. They reflected softly upon the still water, as though the heavens had quietly reached down to meet the earth. The lantern outside the bakery continued to glow. Its golden light wasn't bright enough to chase away the night. It didn't need to be. It simply offered a gentle welcome to anyone who passed by. Inside, the warmth of the stone oven lingered long after the day's final loaf had been sold. The comforting scent of fresh bread still floated through the room, mingling with the faint aroma of oak wood and chamomile tea. Elias placed another small log onto the fire. The flames answered with a soft crackle. Their light danced gently across the old stone walls. The traveler sat quietly by the window, watching the peaceful village settle into sleep. A mother closed the shutters of her little cottage. A father carried his sleepy daughter inside after she had fallen asleep beneath the evening stars. Somewhere across the river, a shepherd softly called his sheep into their wooden pen. The entire village seemed to move with an unspoken rhythm. There was no rushing, no shouting, only the gentle closing of another peaceful day. "It's different here," the traveler said after a long silence. "In what way?" Elias asked. "I've visited places where people were always searching for something. More land, more gold, more success. They hurried from sunrise until long after sunset." He looked toward the glowing lantern. "But no one here seems to be chasing tomorrow." Elias smiled thoughtfully. "Perhaps that's because today has always been enough." The traveler let those words settle in his heart. Today has always been enough. It sounded so simple. And yet, perhaps it was one of the wisest things he had ever heard. Outside, the breeze carried the sweet scent of blooming jasmine through the open doorway. The lantern flame flickered gently, but never went out. A small orange cat wandered up the stone path. Without hesitation, it curled itself into a warm ball beside the bakery door. Elias noticed and quietly placed a folded wool blanket nearby. The cat stretched, purred once, and quickly fell asleep. The traveler smiled. "You even welcome the cats." Elias chuckled softly. "They're good listeners." For a while, neither of them spoke again. The silence was filled instead by peaceful sounds. The crackling fire, the whispering river, the occasional chirp of a cricket outside, the soft ticking of an old wooden clock resting on the shelf above the fireplace. Time itself seemed slower here, gentler, as if it understood that peaceful moments should never be hurried. The traveler opened his weathered journal once more. Beneath the words he had written earlier that morning, he added another sentence. "Some places teach you how to travel. Others quietly teach you how to rest." He closed the journal with a satisfied smile. Outside, the lantern continued to shine beneath the endless stars. Its warm light welcomed every late traveler, every tired soul, and every wandering dream. And although the village was slowly falling asleep, the little bakery remained awake just a little longer, keeping its silent promise that no one arriving after dark would ever feel alone. The bakery that never forgot a name. The night grew deeper, but it never felt lonely. Above Willow Crossing, the stars seemed brighter than ever, scattered across the sky like tiny lanterns of their own. The river reflected them so clearly that it was difficult to tell where the heavens ended and the water began. Inside the bakery, the fire had settled into glowing embers. The room was filled with a gentle orange light that danced across the wooden beams and old stone walls. Elias carefully washed the last wooden bowl of the day. He believed that ending the day with a clean kitchen was just as important as beginning it with fresh dough. Small habits, repeated with care, became the quiet rhythm of a peaceful life. The traveler watched him for a moment before asking, "How long have you been the baker here?" Elias dried his hands with a linen cloth and smiled. "I've stopped counting the years. When I was a boy, I stood exactly where Thomas stands now. I carried flour that was much too heavy for my arms. I swept the floor. I polished the lantern. And every morning, I watched the baker before me knead the dough." The traveler listened closely. "So, someone taught you?" Elias nodded. "My father, and his father before him. The bakery has always belonged to the village. We simply take care of it for a little while." Those words lingered softly in the room. The bakery wasn't something a person owned. It was something they looked after, before passing it gently to the next pair of caring hands. Outside, the lantern continued to glow. Its warm light reached the old wooden bench by the doorway. The little orange cat was still asleep there, its tail curled neatly around its body. A cool breeze rustled the ivy climbing the bakery walls. The leaves whispered together like old friends sharing quiet stories. The traveler smiled. "I've noticed something unusual." Elias looked up. "What is that?" "Everyone in the village seems to know each other's names." Elias laughed softly. "It's a small village. But that's not the reason." He looked toward the quiet street. "When someone new arrives, we remember them. When a child is born, we celebrate together. When someone grows old, we visit them. And when someone leaves, we never forget them." The traveler lowered his eyes. "In some places I've visited, people lived side by side for years, without ever learning their neighbor's name." Elias placed 2 small honey biscuits onto a wooden plate. He slid the plate across the table. Then perhaps those places were missing something more important than they realized. The traveler broke one biscuit in half. It was light, crisp, and fragrant with cinnamon and honey. He smiled after the first bite. "I think I've traveled a very long way, just to remember what kindness feels like." For a while, neither man spoke. The silence was peaceful, comfortable. Outside, an owl called softly from the ancient oak tree near the riverbank. The sound drifted gently through the cool night air before fading into the stillness. The old clock on the bakery wall chimed once. It was late now. Most of Willow Crossing had fallen asleep. Only the lantern remained awake, faithfully shining beside the old wooden door. Its golden light seemed to whisper the same quiet message it had shared for generations. "If you are weary, You are welcome here. And somewhere deep inside, the traveler realized that tomorrow, for the first time in many months, he wasn't thinking about the road ahead. He was simply looking forward to another peaceful morning at the Lantern Bakery, the quiet hours before dawn. The night had grown wonderfully still. The moon hung high above Willow Crossing, casting a soft silver light over the quiet river. The willow trees stood almost motionless, their long branches barely stirring in the cool breeze. From somewhere in the distance came the gentle sound of flowing water, steady and unhurried, just as it had been for centuries. Inside the Lantern Bakery, the warmth of the stone oven lingered in every corner. Though the fire had burned low, the old stones still held the day's gentle heat, making the bakery feel safe and welcoming against the cool night outside. Elias climbed the narrow wooden staircase to the small room where he lived. The steps creaked softly beneath his feet, each one familiar after so many years. His room was simple. A neatly made bed rested beneath a small window. A wooden chair stood beside a modest desk. On the wall hung an old family photograph, faded by time. Beside it rested a tiny shelf holding a few well-loved books, their pages worn from many quiet evenings of reading. Before going to bed, Elias opened the window. The fresh night air drifted gently inside. He could see the lantern glowing faithfully beside the bakery door below. It looked small from up here, yet somehow its warm light reached far beyond the little building. He smiled to himself. Then, as he always did, he whispered softly, "Thank you for another peaceful day." It wasn't a prayer spoken out of habit. It was simply gratitude. Gratitude for warm bread, for kind neighbors, for peaceful mornings, for quiet evenings, and for another ordinary day that had been filled with simple joys. Across the hall, the traveler rested in the small guest room. The bed was modest but comfortable, covered with a thick wool blanket that smelled faintly of lavender. He had not slept indoors for many weeks. As he lay there listening to the peaceful sounds of the bakery, he noticed things he had almost forgotten. The slow ticking of the old clock downstairs, the gentle sigh of the wind around the windows, the soft settling of wooden beams that had stood for generations. None of these sounds disturbed the silence. They became part of it. He closed his eyes. For the first time in a very long while, his thoughts did not wander to distant roads. They did not worry about tomorrow's journey. Instead, they rested quietly beside the memory of warm bread, friendly smiles, and the golden lantern shining outside. Far below, the little orange cat stretched once before curling up again beside the bakery door. Even it seemed to trust that nothing unpleasant would happen here tonight. The village slept peacefully. Farmers dreamed of golden fields. Children dreamed of adventures among the willow trees. Fishermen dreamed of calm waters and gentle mornings. And above them all, countless stars continued their silent journey across the heavens. Hours passed unnoticed. The moon slowly crossed the sky. Its silver light gave way to the faintest hint of blue on the eastern horizon. A new day was quietly waiting just beyond the darkness. The bakery, too, seemed to sense it. The old wooden walls held countless memories of mornings just like this. Soon, Elias would awaken before the first birds began to sing. Soon, flour would once again dust the wooden table. The stone oven would glow with fresh fire. The scent of warm bread would drift through Willow Crossing. And another peaceful chapter of life would begin. For in this little village beside the quiet river, every sunrise was not merely the start of a new day. It was another gentle reminder that happiness could often be found in the simplest of moments. And as the stars slowly faded into the coming dawn, the Lantern Bakery waited patiently, ready to welcome the morning once more. The darkest hour of the night passed so quietly that no one in Willow Crossing noticed it. The stars, one by one, began to fade from the sky. The moon slipped gently behind the western hills, leaving the world wrapped in a peaceful blue twilight. For a few precious moments, everything stood perfectly still. The river flowed without a sound. The trees rested without a whisper. Even the little orange cat remained asleep beside the bakery door, its gentle breathing matching the slow rhythm of the quiet morning. Then, from somewhere deep within the willow trees, a single bird began to sing. Its soft melody floated across the river like the first brushstroke on a blank canvas. Another bird answered, then another. Within minutes, the village was surrounded by a gentle chorus of birdsong, welcoming the arrival of a brand new day. Upstairs, Elias opened his eyes before the first ray of sunlight reached his window. He smiled, not because he had somewhere important to be, but because another peaceful morning had arrived. He dressed quietly, careful not to wake the travelers sleeping in the guest room. The old wooden staircase greeted him with its familiar creaks as he descended into the bakery below. Everything looked exactly as he had left it the evening before. The wooden table, the shelves, the flour jars, the old stone oven, and outside, the brass lantern still glowed softly. Its flame had grown smaller through the night, but it had never gone out. Elias opened the bakery door. The cool morning air welcomed him. He stood for a moment, watching the river shimmer beneath the first light of dawn. Then, with gentle hands, he carefully lowered the lantern. He smiled warmly. "Thank you," he whispered. With a soft breath, he extinguished the tiny flame. A delicate ribbon of smoke curled into the fresh morning air before disappearing completely. The lantern's work was done. It had guided another peaceful night. Now it was time for the sunrise to take its place. Inside the bakery, Elias struck a piece of flint. A spark appeared, then another. Soon the stone oven glowed once more. The familiar crackle of oak wood filled the quiet room. The traveler awoke to the comforting sound. For a moment, he wasn't sure where he was. Then the warm scent of fresh bread drifted upstairs. He smiled before even opening his eyes. Some places, he thought, could make you feel at home in only a single day. He dressed and quietly walked downstairs. Elias looked up from the mixing bowl. "Good morning." "Good morning," the traveler replied. "I believe I slept more peacefully last night than I have in many months." Elias nodded with a gentle smile. "The bakery has a way of encouraging good dreams." The traveler laughed softly. "I think you're right." They worked together in comfortable silence. Elias kneaded the fresh dough while the traveler measured flour and filled small baskets with yesterday's clean linen cloths. Neither needed many words. The quiet companionship was enough. As the first golden rays of sunlight entered through the bakery windows, the brass bell above the door rang gently. It was little Thomas again. He stepped inside with the same bright smile as always. "Good morning, Mr. Elias." "Good morning, Thomas." The little boy noticed the traveler. "You stayed." The traveler smiled. "I did." Thomas grinned. "I'm glad. We always have more room at breakfast." The three of them shared a warm loaf of bread, fresh butter, and sweet honey gathered from the nearby hills. Outside, Willow Crossing slowly came to life once more. Smoke rose from chimneys. Fishermen walked toward the river. Children laughed on their way across the wooden bridge. Flowers opened to greet the morning sun. And the bakery filled once again with the comforting aroma of fresh bread. The traveler reached for his journal one last time. On the final page, he wrote, "There are places that impress the eyes, and there are places that quietly heal the heart. The Lantern Bakery beside the quiet river is one of those rare places. If you are fortunate enough to find it, stay a little longer than you planned. You may discover that the greatest journeys are not measured by the miles you travel, but by the peace you carry home." He gently closed the journal. Outside, the village welcomed another beautiful day. Inside, the Lantern Bakery welcomed everyone who stepped through its old wooden door. And although our first visit to Willow Crossing has come to an end, the warm oven still glows. The river still flows. The lantern still waits for evening. And tomorrow, another gentle story will begin. Until then, may your dreams be peaceful. May your heart feel light. And may you always find a warm light waiting for you, wherever your journey leads.